Firing Line with William F. Buckley, Jr. Tonight's guest, Dr. Timothy Leary. Here's tonight's chairman, C. Dickerman Williams.
Ladies and gentlemen, our topic of discussion tonight is the world of LSD. Our guest is Dr. Timothy Leary, founder of the modern psychedelic movement. Our student guests are from Queens College. Mr. Buckley, will you proceed?
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Timothy Leary is the Pope of what he chooses to call a new religion, which is based on the consumption of drugs, particularly at the moment LSD, whose attractions are said to be sweeping the campuses, and after whose initials Dr. Leary has named his new religion the League for Spiritual Discovery. Dr. Leary really is a doctor of clinical psychology. He went to school in Alabama and took a PhD in Berkeley, and after experiencing nirvana in Spain, went to Harvard, where he was in due course fired. Now, it is not easy to be fired from Harvard, at least not for misbehavior. But it transpired that Dr. Leary had become tour director for a lot of his students whom he was sending on long-distance trips through the mists of psychedelic experience. Dr. Leary then went to Millbrook, New York, which has served as the headquarters of his movement, but he has traveled widely and is used to receiving standing ovations as he advances the position that, as someone observed, that opiates are the religion of the people. I'd like to ask Dr. Leary, why is it so generally recognized that well-adjusted people tend to LSD and other drugs more so than less, or rather less so than well-adjusted people?
Would you repeat the question?
Yeah. Why is it that it is the common impression that poorly adjusted people tend in greater numbers to the world of LSD than normally adjusted people?
Well, I've never heard that suggested before. The people who are using marijuana,
But then you're badly adjusted.
Today tend to be the highly educated. They come from our so-called best colleges. There's no LSD or marijuana problem down in Podunk Junior College in Arkansas. It's at Harvard, Princeton, and even at Yale that 50 to 70% of the undergraduates are seriously experimenting with the most important thing that can be experimented with, their own consciousness.
Are you confusing adjustment with education?
No, I'm not suggesting that.
Why did you mention the difference between Podunk U and Yale University? What makes you think they're better adjusted at Yale than at Podunk U? You hadn't thought about it. Nobody told you before, right?
No, I'm trying to see what your problem is, and I think I've diagnosed it.
Go ahead, Doc.
Your approach to the word drug, I think, is that of many Americans, particularly over the age of 50. When the word drug is mentioned, think of some opiate, something that is an escape, something that takes you away from reality, something that you take if you're a failure. All of the statistics that I've seen indicate that the people who use psychedelic drugs are people who are pretty well adjusted by any standard or criterion you'd want to name. Income, education, creativity, productivity, and they want more because what psychedelic drugs produce is not the dull, glazed, free martini haze. Psychedelic drugs intensify consciousness. They're microscopic in their effect, and they're used by people who are looking for more.
Well, they may be used by people who are looking for more, but they are also used by people who seem to feel incompetent to use natural experience as a means of getting more. Isn't that the case?
Not at all.
A fascinating discussion in progress and in store on Firing Line. We'll continue in a moment.
You were saying, Dr. Leary.
I was attempting to answer your question about who is using psychedelic drugs. Of course, this is like asking how many virgins are there at Vassar and who are they? There's no way of getting an accurate statistic as to how many and what percentage of the population are experimenting with consciousness. but it's happening. It's happening in larger numbers, and from my observations, it tends to be young people, the creative minority, and the socially alienated minority groups in the United States, particularly the American Indian, the Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, so on.
Oh, I don't doubt it's happening any more than I doubt that nervous breakdowns are happening. I'm simply interested in trying to confirm an impression, and that impression is that not that the world is divided into two groups, but that by and large you can identify people who symbolize two different groups. There is that one group which, to use the conventional vocabulary of clinical psychology, is well adjusted in the sense of being able to cope with reality. There is that other group that can't cope with reality and under the circumstances, whether out of adventurism or whether out of intrigue or whether out of hopelessness, tends this year to look to LSD, last year to cocaine, the year before that to alcohol, and day after tomorrow, as you have pointed out, to something else. Now, are we entitled to infer anything from this fact? For instance, take people that by all accounts are considered pretty normal. Oh, Harry Truman, say. Could you imagine Harry Truman taking a trip?
Nope. I'll give you the...
Did you mean that to be an anti-Truman observation?
Not at all. Drop out of politics, young people. The one sociological or psychological characteristic of the psychedelic movement is age. As a matter of fact, I think that the only important political issue in the United States today, the division, is how old are you? I think that people under the age of 30 come from a entirely different way of life. I think that they're mutants.
Well, they're younger, yeah.
No, they've been brought up in a world, Bill, which is entirely different from the one that you and I knew. It's already gone beyond my comprehension. The kids today are into electronics. They're into experiments in consciousness. They're into a level of awareness which I can dimly grasp, but can only, as it passes me by, take off my hat and say, Godspeed to.
Yeah, well, I say Godspeed to them too, without necessarily handing them pot in the same gesture. But
nobody's handing the kids today anything.
Well,
they are finding what they need. They're using what makes sense.
Manifestly, they are not.
Well, I think they are.
At least not the noisiest of them. The noisiest of them are making a great deal of noise precisely because they feel necessary to express either their refusal to come to terms with the world or their psychological incapacity to do so. I'm very much in sympathy with them. I think it's extremely hard to come to terms with the world that liberalism built. But at the same time, I haven't counseled
I agree with you there.
the kind of disengagement that you have. One of the things that fascinates me about you, and there are a lot of things you do, is your use of language. There's a sort of a 19th century tushery, there's sort of a mysticism there that causes you to write sentences like this when you describe dropping out, which you counsel everybody to do. Dropping out, you say, means to detach yourself harmoniously, tenderly, and gracefully from worldly commitments until your entire life is dedicated to worship and search. Now, to the extent that I can understand English, and I have a hard time sometimes, doesn't that really mean that you should abandon a commitment to your family, abandon a commitment to your church, to your country, to supra-personal ideals? And isn't this really a retreat into yourself and a failure to come to grips with the fact that the world exists other than merely of yourself?
No, because what you diagnose as the world is actually the fake prop television studio of New York City and the United States today. The motto of our religion is turn on, tune in, and drop out. Now, this happens to be the oldest message which has been passed on by spiritual teachers and spiritual searchers for thousands of years. You've got to detach yourself from the situation. Our country was founded on exactly that motto. sorry, George III, we're dropping out. The Roman Empire fell, as the American Empire will fall in the near future, from exactly the same motive. People turning within and then coming back to found their spiritual and their political and their economic life, not on the IBM mass assembly line society, but on the family and the tribe. I mentioned to you earlier, Bill, in the dressing room that I consider myself to be much more conservative than you. At Millbrook, New York, and in hundreds of similar places in the United States today, psychedelic people are leaving the 20th century. We're leaving this fake prop television studio, and we're going back to exactly the values which have been fragmented and destroyed by American society. We're going back to the family. We teach our kids. We give our kids psychedelic sacraments like marijuana and LSD, just the way you would
really
perhaps
old-fashioned, isn't it? Yeah.
send. Well, as a matter of fact, there's nothing that's more old-fashioned than a parent worshiping with his child and sharing in the shrine of the home the deep spiritual moments of life. Now, your idea, and perhaps the idea of many of your viewers, is that psychedelic chemicals are like heroin, or perhaps like a super alcohol, that you get drunk or that you lose touch with reality. Of course, this is the myth which we try very hard to overcome, that like it or not, believe it or not, the LSD experience is a philosophic and a religious experience.
Well, I
And
know
it does lead
as,
you,
as
as
much
any
about
religious experience has in the past, to detach yourself, not from the family, or not from your ideals, but from the fake prop society, and go back.
Sure, that can be said of suicide, too. As a matter of fact, it can be said of any a number of drugs. And let's go ahead and agree that LSD seems to be in some particulars different from other opiates or drugs or chemicals. I think that's the word you prefer to use. At the same time, agreeing that LSD is a departure from the normal world, and that under the circumstances, people who accept its influence.
But Bill, what do you mean by normal world? Do you
themselves.
mean Harry Truman?
Well,
Is that normal? Do you mean
well,
Democrat, Republican? Is that normal? Do you mean
no.
this sort of a television studio? This is
The-
highly
the
unnormal
world.
to
Yeah,
to
it
me and
is the
to
world.
thousands of people like me who are leaving the cities. We're going back to, yes.
Yeah, well, assuming that you accept the existence of existential reality, that is to say, assuming that you are not a solipsist who believes that all of the world is yourself and your particular projections, then I say that there is a natural order. People who have eyes can see it, people who have noses can smell it, and people who have ears can hear it. And that's the kind of world I am talking about. And it seems to me that people who are willing to take LSD, even in spite of the fact that doctors are united in their judgment that to do so is to take a drug whose consequences are not simply uncharted. You can go to Bellevue tonight, as you know, and find people who took a trip, and the consequences of that we will not know for years, perhaps, certainly. These people are driven out of a sense of desperation to find something new, precisely because they can't cope with what is.
But
Now, a
that's
certain
the,
amount
that's
of
the very
escapism is
small
perfectly natural.
minority. Granted, in a social movement in which you have hundreds of thousands of millions of people taking LSD every few months, granted, a few of these people take it out of a sense of desperation, out of a sense of failure in life. But I suspect that the percentage of these people is surprisingly small. Everyone who is listening to my words right now knows something about what LSD does. It really brings you down to where you're at. It's a relentless microscope. It's a spotlight on all of your egocentricities and all of your deceits. I suspect that most people don't take LSD because they're afraid to, because they don't want to face this rather brutal confrontation.
But quite rightly, they should be afraid to.
I've never advocated the use of LSD.
You haven't?
And I'm not advocating it now. I'm warning people that psychedelic chemicals, of which LSD is the current, but we already have new ones coming along, is a powerful trip. It will show you things about yourself and about the divine process that you and your mind have been protected from.
But you're careful to say you don't urge it, because I gather it's against the law or something like that, but you did say somewhere that you figured 20 years from now, half of the members of the Supreme Court would be smoking pot.
Yes.
But as a matter of fact, I think they probably have been already. It's the only way to account for some of those decisions. But really, I think that you ought to level with us and say, if the law permitted you to recommend the use of LSD, you would. Isn't that correct?
Not at all. No, there's no law against
Dr. Timothy Leary is the
saying
guest
whatever I
on
want
tonight's
to.
edition of Firing Line. Our host is William F. Buckley, Jr., and we'll continue in a moment.
You are aware, Dr. Leary, that 50 or 60 years ago, young Sigmund Freud was very much taken with the uses of cocaine and advised his wife to use it and wrote a considerable treatise on it, only to find out that subsequently that it was addictive, and that he went through an experience which might not end up being so dissimilar from your own. That is to say, let's look forward to the possibility that 2 years from now you, with the acute conscience, would be willing to re-enter those worldly commitments and advise people that they had made a mistake by taking indiscriminately a drug as dangerous as LSD.
Well, I've never urged anyone to take LSD, and what we have been doing for several years, Bill, in all of our publications and lectures, is warning people about this power. People seem to think that we invented LSD. We didn't. You know, God made LSD. The divine process, the evolutionary sequence over the billions of years has produced the plants and the vegetables and the molecules, which we now call psychedelic. Nor do we tell people to drop out of life or drop out of familial responsibility. But we tell everyone that wants to listen to us, drop out of American society.
Why do you
we
use
think
the
American
hortatory?
society is an insane anthill. And the human being has been living for, you know, hundreds of thousands of years before we had any of the things we consider so necessary in American life today. You can actually live, you can make love, you can enjoy food, you can raise children without being a computerized, mechanized American.
Well, not exactly. Somebody's got to protect you so that you can proceed to do this. Without
Dr.
the
Leary,
American Marines,
yes.
you wouldn't have much chance to make love, you know, except
One of
maybe
our
in Siberia.
One of our student guests has a question for you.
Good.
Dr. Leary, in your new religion, have you found God? And if so, what is he like?
Yes, I have found God. The LSD experience is a brutal confrontation with the divine process. I wouldn't say that I talk with God. That would be too arrogant. I say I have listened to God. Now, do you want me to describe what God is like? You know I can't do that for thousands of years.
Egalitarian?
Yeah. For thousands of years, men in my position have been trying to describe the ineffable. I would use the words of St. Martin and say that I can't describe God to you, but I can tell you how to find him. And then you're going to have to stand there naked in front of the divine process with your little 20th century ego behind, and you're going to have to surrender to it, or you're going to be frightened and call for a doctor. But that's what the psychedelic experience is all about. That's what the visionary experience is all about. It's always been a matter of heaven or hell. It's always required trust, confidence. It always taxes and tests your spiritual assets. It shows you where you're at. And then you come back and you define God the best you can. That's why we have a psychedelic art today. The new rock and roll beats, the new psychedelic design is, I think, Bill, a symptom of the fact that this new religion is, has a certain validity. I think that the new confrontation with God always produces a new form of art. Now, the new form of art, the new religious language in the future is going to be electronic. It's going to involve a vocabulary and instrumentation that is just as new to me as the printing press was when Gutenberg came along a few hundred years ago and said, "Hey, do you know that you can turn on to God with a printed word?" And I said, "No, you can't do that. That must be against the law." Electronics is going to be the language of the theology of the future.
If I may say so, I think that's and I say this with all due respect, utter, total gobbledygook.
Mr. Buckley?
It may be, well, let me comment on this, may I, Mr. Chairman? It may be that in the world of the future, we're going to be incapable of making sound distinctions. I don't doubt the possibility of that. It may be that we're heading for an Orwellian world in which IBM itself will assume some sort of metaphysical reality. But I say that if that happens, we will have lost whatever it is that makes civilization take any meaning at all. I don't think it's that easy to form new religions. Somebody once asked Voltaire how to found a new religion, and his answer was go out and get crucified and then rise again on the third day. Which I think might be a test that even LSD would be incapable of accomplishing for you.
Mr. Buckley, we have a question for you from the
Mr.
student.
Buckley. Aldous Huxley, who wrote a brilliant work called Brave New World, also wrote in The Doors of Perception that a man could use marijuana to open up such doors of perception. Why do you believe a man as brilliant and as prominent as Mr. Huxley would use such a thing as marijuana?
Because Mr. Huxley, A, was eccentric, as he would have been the first to acknowledge. B, everything that he went on to say and to talk about in the Brave New World was not by any means based on his use not of marijuana but of mescaline. And C, the use of mescaline was the use of a drug whose potency is 1/500th the strength of LSD. So mescaline was just his snuff, you know. Mescaline was no more important to him than snuff was to Lord Chesterfield.
Bill, I'd like to ask
he
you...
happened to try to weave a mystique around it, which bores most people in due course. They read Brave New World not because of the fact that mescaline features in it, but simply because it's a brilliant job of improvisation.
I want to ask you a question. Our position in relationship to the law of Caesar today is that the human body is the first and last frontier of freedom. The people who follow the psychedelic religion are always in trouble with the law these days. And our position is that whatever moves out in the streets, behavior, property, weapons and so forth, Caesar's law holds here, and obey the law as far as overt behavior is concerned. But when it comes to your own body, what you put in your body, who you put in your body, what you do in the privacy of your own home to bring about changes in consciousness is your own business. And we reject the right of any medical or legislative body to tell us what to do within inside this sacred premise, the temple of God.
But my friend, you see, it's not that easy. As witness the fact that a few months ago you were screaming around the joint asking for a tax exemption for your new religion, which right away means that us all has got to pay for you all in order to wallow in your nirvana in Millbrook, New York. Plus
not
also,
you all, the people who believe in our religion are going to support us just the way Catholics support the Catholic Church. Now, come on. Okay. But I would not object.
Plus also there are people in Bellevue Hospital
I would not object,
supported by
Bill,
the taxpayers who have taken LSD. I simply reject the absolute that a person's
I would say
body is
that there are fewer people
in a civilized society.
The facts of the matter are that there are fewer people in mental hospitals today than there were 5 or 10 years ago. Now, whatever's going on in this culture, psychologically, it's keeping people out of mental hospitals. The facts of the matter are that there's a surprising low rate of casualties, considering the enormous number of people.
I'm not sure why you advance that highly interesting datum, i.e. in connection with what, but
I think that's what's happening to the consciousness of American people is keeping them out of mental hospitals. But let's go back to this legal question, Bill, because
that's what I'm trying to do.
I'm trying to strike a common ground here. I consider myself to be a very conservative person, highly orthodox in my defense of the individual.
Yes.
Now, not as far as money is concerned, not as far as property is concerned. There we'll take our chances with the rest. But when it comes to your own home and your own body, I think Caesar has no right entering.
You said that, yeah. And what I didn't have a chance to say was this, that in a civilized society, one acknowledges that what one does with one's body can very often have an effect on somebody else's body. For instance, to take the obvious case, if I have leprosy, let's say I'm quarantined, the those who argue against permitting the propagandas, permitting people to proselytize the use of LSD, do so on grounds that I find extremely persuasive. Namely that if in fact you urge somebody to take LSD, when in fact you're urging them to take a drug, the consequences of which are considered to be medically unsafe, there is a sense in which you are an aggressor. Now, I agree with you. There oughtn't to be a law that says that you can't take LSD, but there ought, in my judgment, to be a law saying that you can't urge other people to take
That's an
LSD.
interesting point, and I debate this with Dr. Leary all the time. He says he doesn't care if I take LSD, he doesn't want me to talk about it. And I'm willing to give the federal government the right to put the label on the package. I agree that cyanide is dangerous. There should be a label on the package, warning, cyanide will cause a lethal stomachache. Cigarettes are dangerous. Warning, nicotine will cause lung cancer. On the package of marijuana, which will be legalized very soon, it should say, warning, marijuana will make you come to your senses. On the package of LSD, let them put any kind of warning they want. Warning, LSD will cause death and rebirth. I don't care. I'll let the doctors put the label, but they cannot put us in jail for possessing and using chemicals which change only our consciousness and our spiritual centeredness.
The topic, the world of LSD. The host, William F. Buckley, Jr. The guest, Dr. Timothy Leary. And the program, Firing Line. We'll continue in a
I'm trying to
moment.
get you to come out for the legalization of pot bill, but...
Dr. Leary, we have a question for you from a student.
Mr. Leary, before, in the beginning of the program, you sort of classified yourself as a sociological conservative and that you wanted stronger family ties and stronger family bonds. Now, don't you feel that LSD would be sort of a chemical crutch which would stifle the responsibility needed for caring for a family or for having the consciousness of perceiving the responsibility you need for a family?
Not at all. See, LSD expands consciousness and makes you more aware of what's really important in life. In our growing and very rudimentary utopian community at Millbrook, we believe in educating the children ourselves. We think that the children should take psychedelic drugs when they're old enough to know what's involved. We think that they should learn their professions the way men have always learned their professions, around the village, around the tribe, watching their father or their uncle or the guy next door. The idea that the average American will send his child away to school and turn the mind, the precious consciousness of his kid, over to a stranger that he doesn't know, that he probably wouldn't even have to his house for dinner. I consider this to be, like turning your child's mind over to drug pushers who hang around primary schools. The drugs they're pushing are symbols and the worst kind of robot values. We believe in educating our kids ourselves in our own community, and we would never think of urging anonymous impersonal education. You know, we assume, Bill, that America, with its educational system, has that's some kind of standard of norm. Actually, public education, as you well know, is a very recent, modern innovation, and I consider it to be a very unfortunate one.
Mr. Buckley?
We're doing our best to get away from it.
We have a question for you from a student.
Yes, Mr. Buckley, Marsh McLuhan has mentioned that the electronic media may have, in the long run, much similar effects that, as the psychedelic drugs do in affecting changes in consciousness on the populace as a whole, especially in reference to electronic tribalism and a new consciousness. I wonder if you would react to this.
Yeah, react is exactly the right invitation. I think that it's quite true that that there are, whether the McLuhan thesis and the Leary thesis are tied together. They have pretty much identical metaphysical conceits. They seem to, both of them, to assume that there is a means of operating, a means of cognition, a means of knowing, a means of proceeding into the future that is divorced from the exercise of the intellect and the intellect and the moral intellect by conventional means. Now, again, I don't profess completely to understand Mr. McLuhan, and since every book by Mr. McLuhan is an explanation of his last book, I suspect that he shares my own difficulty. But I agree with your observation most emphatically that there is a relationship, in a sense, between the McLuhanite impatience and Dr. Leary's.
Mr. Buckley, let me ask you a question. Aren't you overlooking the fact that Dr. Leary is giving you arguments for some of your theories? You're opposed to to large-scale bureaucracy. You said that his followers didn't like the world that liberalism has built. Isn't he giving you an argument against liberalism there? You keep coming back to drugs.
No, he is, in the phrase of somebody, sending somebody to the guillotine is a cure for a case of dandruff. Now, however bad the dandruff is, a complete retreat from reality is not, in my judgment, the way to handle it. If all of us who objected to liberalism were to think things were that easy, we'd simply pack up and go somewhere. There's presumably a corner of the earth where it doesn't completely exist.
Yes, but that doesn't just show the...
That happened to be, though, Bill, how this country was formed. People just dropped out and moved on to form their new religious group, and that's exactly what we're urging today.
No, they didn't drop out.
Saying to kids, drop out, start your new tribal thing fresh.
You know,
Dr. Leary, isn't that the way the Roman Empire fell, by people simply leaving the plantations, leaving the cities?
Let's be clear about that. The result of the psychedelic revolution is going to bring down the American empire, not by violence, by love, as you saw in Central Park Easter Sunday. We had 2,000 kids out in the streets cleaning the streets of Greenwich Village last week out of love, flowers. American empire is going to fall, but it's not going to fall by violence or by force. I tell kids all the time, don't picket, don't protest. The left, the activist left, is very disturbed with me, as you probably know, Bill, because they rightly see that we are urging many of the dissident, anti-establishment young people to protest in the only effective way, a protest of loving passivity, a protest of familial turning on together, a protest of flowers and beauty.
Mr. Buckley, we have a question for you from a student.
Mr. Buckley, there seems to be some sort of discrepancy between your and Dr. Leary's feeling about the pathology of taking LSD. I was wondering if you or Dr. Leary could comment on that.
Well, I suppose I simply start by saying that I am not a doctor of clinical psychology, but neither am I party pre on the subject. I don't expect Mr. Camel to hit cigarettes, and I don't expect Mr. Leary to hit LSD. In point of fact,
but Bill, I'm not talking about
in point
LSD.
of fact, people who defend its indiscriminate use are a tiny minority of the medical profession. In fact, I think you'd have to scrounge to find the name of a single person, unless he was somebody who had also been fired from Harvard University.
Dr. Leary, a student has a question for you.
Dr. Leary, I'm very confused by your term conscious expanding. Does this indicate an increased capacity of the mind to perceive in its conscious state or only while it's high? In other words, do you achieve an increased awareness and an ability to perceive things while you are in your normal state or only while you're high?
Now, psychedelic drugs are very much like the microscope or the telescope. You see, the microscope is psychedelic. It shows you something that is invisible to normal vision. And 400 or 500 years ago, if I went before an audience and I told normal, well-adjusted people that there was a world around them of lawful beauty and predictability that you couldn't see with the naked eye, they'd probably send me up for more than 30 years. Then I say, look through this microscope, and indeed you see that there's another level of reality, another level of consciousness. Now then, when you take your eye away from the microscope and you go back to the macroscopic world, then you have to start thinking about. You have to start describing. You have to start making observations. You have to build up a textbook of cellular cytology so that other people can take the microscope or can take LSD and check you out. Now, the science of taking LSD is just as replicable, just as repeatable, just as checkable as looking through a telescope or looking through a microscope. Only one eye can do it at a time. At the present time in the United States today, we've had hundreds of thousands of people who have looked through the microscope of LSD and come back and said, yes, there's something there which is of importance, of power, of philosophic and religious import that demands serious study and eventually demands that you change your life. Now, I've been studying the use of LSD in the United States for several years. Many people have started to use LSD and have quit because the demands were too great. The yoga of LSD is not an escape. It's not an easy way out. It's the toughest and the most arduous yoga of all, because you look through the microscope and then you come back to the level of reality. You try to change reality so that it fits your inner revelation. This happens to be, of course...
Those microscopes, in the sense that you use them, have been around for a long time, as you said in another connection a moment ago.
Yes.
But incidentally, since the time that microscopes were discovered, I don't see that a lot of people spend their time looking into them. This is rather a job that has to be done, but preferably is not done by everybody at all. It's hardly an aesthetic experience to look through a microscope at, let's say, a cancer cell, is it?
I think...
You are watching the William Buckley program, and we'll continue in a moment.
Dr. Leary, one of the reasons why you confuse it, it seems to me that you use a terminology that sometimes is convenient for you to talk in terms of an ancient perspective. Sometimes seems to be convenient for you to talk in terms of your own particular chiliastic contributions as a newly arrived religious redeemer. But I don't quite understand two things, and I'm very anxious for you to discuss them before we quit. Number one, I do have to accuse you of a lack of candor. On the one hand, you say you never urge people to use LSD. On the other hand, you've sung here a rhapsody to the virtues of LSD, which, it seems to me, would cause anybody who desires to be virtuous, assuming that he is impressed by what you say, to rush out and try to find this stuff. You say that it increases your experience, it increases your sense of love, it increases your sense of harmony, it increases your sense of perception, that it is to the modern world what the books were to the discoverer of books, that it is to the immediate world what the discovery of the microscope was, and so on and so forth. But you refuse to say, let's all go out and take a trip together. Now, I don't think it's lack of conviction on your part. I think it's a technique. Whether it's a conscious technique or something that was vouchsafed to you on one of your trips, I don't know. But I'm interested in that. See? Why don't you just say everybody ought to take LSD? Or is this a legal problem?
Well, the key to our religion, Bill, and to our politics and to our economics is individual freedom. I have no right to tell anyone what to do with their... Pardon?
What does that got to do with individual freedom? I'm individual
I have
freedom.
no right to tell anyone else what to do with your body. Your body is the temple of God.
Ridiculous. You can say brush your teeth without interfering with their freedom, can't you?
I don't want, there'll be a law. The Dental Society will pass a law pretty soon saying I've got to brush my teeth, and with so-and-so...
Who's talking about laws? I'm not saying we're going to have a law in which you require people to take LSD. I'm talking about you as an evangelist. And I don't know what you're doing here if you're not an evangelist. But I want to know why this schizophrenia.
I'm trying to share time with a mind that I tremendously respect. I want to get you interested in this problem of millions of Americans having St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine experiences. It's happening around you. I want to turn you on, Bill. I want to get you to drop out. I admire this man very much, and it's a tragedy to me that one of the greatest minds in America is involved with such trivia as the mayoralty election in New York. Or, you're much too big for that.
I agree.
How about...
You won that.
I want to turn you on and drop you out.
Yeah, but what would have happened? What would have happened if Saint Augustine had taken this stuff? The answer is that he probably never would have been conscious to write those travails, which are the most beautiful monuments to human...
Exactly,
yeah.
I was...
you wouldn't have heard of his name if he had
about 3
lived
weeks
in
ago
Millbrook.
on the beach. In St. Augustine, you will get one of the best descriptions of an LSD experience which has ever been written. It's right down there, the 5 levels of consciousness. St. Augustine took a trip.
It's St. Augustine, St. Augustine, Florida.
And St. Thomas Aquinas, as you well know, at the end of his life, after all those years writing the Summa, said it's all a bale of straw compared to that one great high that he got towards the end of his life. There's so much in this that you're just about to turn on them. You're just about to turn on.
What you're doing is co-opting any moment of historical sublimity as exactly equal to the kind of thing that you're able to produce in a $5 sugar cube.
Now, that's not true.
Well,
People
it
say
is
to me,
true.
how can it be that you can take just this little pill? Because that's not what's involved. Any American today who takes LSD is taking it in defiance of the American Medical Association. Every doctor's warning you, you'll lose your mind, you'll lose your body if you do it. And if you do it anyway, that's more than a $5 kick. You're laying your
right?
blue chips on the line, as men have always done in history when they've had this experience. And the beauty of the AMA position denouncing LSD, I love it because it really tests the sincerity and the courage of a person who takes this trip. The trip has always been difficult. It's the trip of death and rebirth. It's the trip of Ulysses. It's the trip of Dante. It's the death-rebirth experience. And I'm delighted that
what are the AMA's
it.
motives? I gather they're sinister because of the charade you went through. Yeah. What are the motives? What is it that causes them to give bad advice intentionally?
Caesar is always tempted to turn people off.
Now, wait a minute.
Well, Mr. Buckley, perhaps it's the same thing that urges them to recommend fluoridation, which is compulsory medication. Perhaps it's the desire of organizations to have their way.
Control.
Yeah, but that isn't sinister.
Control.
If dentists recommend fluoridation on the grounds that that's going to reduce cavities, I wouldn't consider that sinisterly motivated. But if doctors are saying that the more people who take LSD, the more cases of illness you're going to have, it seems to me it would be sinister if they didn't recommend against taking it, you see. That's why I want something to justify Dr. Leary's contempt of the medical profession for giving us this advice, something I can understand.
I wasn't contempt. I'm glad they're doing it, because today anyone who takes LSD knows he's running a risk. And let me say that
the doctors, not
you
the
are
students.
running a risk if you take LSD. You're going to really be confronted, so that I'm not really being contemptuous of the AMA. The stronger Caesar's legions are, the happier we are, because that means the ball game is playing out with greater energy.
Mr. Buckley, you keep coming back to drugs all the time. Do you agree or not agree in the evils in modern society that Dr. Leary keeps emphasizing?
Of course I do. Of course I do.
You think the Conservative Party is the better solution?
But as somebody said a moment ago, that actually if you find people who are acutely pressed, emotionally or psychologically, you'll find that they're exactly pressed by the problems that pressed people 2,000 years ago and 1,500 years ago and 10,000. The existence of the bomb is in and of itself interesting, but the pressure that each of us feels individually is not greater, for instance, than that that was felt by somebody living in Rome, not knowing whether 2 days later he would be alive.
Thrown to the lions.
That's right.
Yes.
And I think that it is true that chemistry has come along, as Dr. Leary has shown us, and has given us an opiate, i.e. it has made popularly available little quickie means by which we can force ourselves through chemical means to get away.
You could say the same thing about the printing press.
But what happens is, and let me quote somebody I respect very much, a psychoanalyst in New York, who says, as his tolerance, the drug taker, for life without drugs increases, his competence for such life diminishes, so that with every return to the drug he is, in the spirit of Heraclitus, a different and lesser person who attempts to cross the same stream twice. And that's why I think the more people rely on drugs, the more incompetent they become to handle life without them. And under the circumstances, they end up mostly complete addicts.
Dr. Leary, you were comparing the present situation with the late Roman Empire, when the serfs deserted the plantations and took to the mountains. If people today take LSD, won't their ability to go to the mountains and live a self-sufficient life be seriously impaired?
By LSD?
Yes.
No, yes, you're laboring under the misapprehension that LSD is like booze, that you shoot it up and stagger around. You can do anything that you do normally better if you know how to use LSD. I'm not making any guarantee here. You can drive a car better. I've often told this story.
You can go over Niagara Falls better, can't you?
Well, if that's your trip, Bill. My trip, your trip seems to lead people to Niagara Falls or the mental hospital. My trip leads people out to the country, away from this horrible city, and we can make a living.
Yes, but that requires vigor, energy, strength. And I'm afraid that Mr. Buckley is afraid that they'll lose that vigor through taking LSD. You disagree?
Look around at the people who are taking LSD. I don't want to use the word vigor because I know that has political overtones today, which I wouldn't want to go along with, but the LSD movement, I think, has betrayed a great deal of vigor to have brought about this, this mass movement. We haven't been sitting around, Bill, just shooting up and contemplating our navel and the glories of our own intuitions. We have been changing your society almost as fast as you can
imperceptibly, yeah.
Pardon? Now, whether you like it or not, Bill, you must grant that we've been activists, and we've been rather effective at it. And I would say this is one testimony to the fact that the drug doesn't set you off into some passive
Well, you don't
nirvana.
have to be activist. The man who invented whiskey didn't have to be an activist.
Mr. Buckley, we have one more question for you.
I'm just wondering if one can tune in, turn on, and not drop out, and thereby reorganize the experiences one is having. So perhaps if Mr. Buckley would tune in, turn on, and not drop out, and thereby become mayor, could he, for example, function as a mayor?
Why don't you handle that? An anticlimax like Forgotten
No,
for Yale.
I feel very good tonight, and I have a great deal of affection and respect for you. I do feel you're misusing your God-given talents, which is so easy for a Yale graduate to do. And I want to appeal to you at the level of kind of a challenge that if you examine the philosophic and ontological issues of the psychedelic revolution, I think you'll see some overtones from the history of the Catholic Church. And in many respects, I would be more at home, Bill, in the Middle Ages, because the things that obsess us and concern us at Millbrook is what is the meaning of God? The basic ontological question is what is real? And in a funny way, we're combining the Middle Ages, which I think it was not a Dark Ages, but indeed an age of tremendous meaning and dedication, with the electronic age, because we can't throw out electronics. And no one is more concerned with this IBM
well,
robot
than everybody who can loosely be called a conservative.
The guest on tonight's William Buckley program is Dr. Timothy Leary, and we'll continue in just a moment.
Gentlemen, we must bring this most interesting discussion to a close. We are out of time. Thank you, Dr. Leary. Thank you, Mr. Buckley.